New tonight, President Trump has given his first joint address to Congress since taking office 44 days ago. Chief political reporter Amanda Rooker and political analyst Dennis Goldford are in studio tonight with the key points from the president's speech.
Well, Ben, in his first address of his second term in the Oval Office, Donald Trump said, quote, "America is back," and told Americans tonight that he's, quote, "just getting started." So, Dennis, what was your overall impression from Trump's speech tonight?
Well, the first thing to say, I think, is that we know politics is a tough business, but the level of partisan rancor for this speech was really just remarkable. Of course, the Democrats sat on their hands all evening. One was even thrown out, as we saw. The Republicans jumped up to applaud at absolutely everything the president said. So it illustrated the kind of partisan division and rancor we have in the country. But I think overall, what he tried to do was tout what he claims to be his accomplishments in these first several weeks of his administration. The fact checkers, of course, will be busy to say which, from what he said, what is accurate and what is perhaps not accurate.
There were a lot of claims made tonight, which we were expecting. I mean, in these sort of speeches, presidents tout what they see as their top accomplishments. A lot of times, the beginning of a term, you know, the president is talking about what he's envisioning for the future. Instead, for Trump, we heard a lot about what he feels like he's accomplished in just 6 weeks in the Oval Office. You know, let's take a listen to what he told Americans.
Over the past 6 weeks, I have signed nearly 100 executive orders and taken more than 400 executive actions, a record to restore common sense, safety, optimism, and wealth all across our wonderful land. The people elected me to do the job, and I'm doing it.
So, Dennis, I think one of the things we were expecting is Americans may have some confusion of what's going on in the White House with just the constant stream that's coming out, all of the things that he's doing. And Trump's task tonight was perhaps to tell Americans, this is what I have delivered for you so far. You know, what stood out for you in the topics that he addressed tonight?
Well, they were pretty much of his standard topics. As someone who does a lot of writing myself and speaking, it seemed not to be organized as well as it might have been, but the speechwriters had a lot that they wanted to talk about. But certainly he talked about and returned consistently to the issue of illegal immigration and what he says is the violence that comes from that. He talked about tariffs. He loves that word, he always says. But I think broadly speaking, in terms of why many people who are perhaps a little more on the fence might have tuned in, the recent worries with regard to the economy, the stock market, certainly as we've seen this week, and what might happen to Medicare and Medicaid and indeed the farm sector with these changes, he didn't really talk about those.
Yeah, one thing I noticed is when he's talking about the economy, he several times blamed the Biden administration for what was left. Although he has not been in office for that long, although he did promise Americans that prices would drop on day one. And did you notice anything of, a plan for moving forward on how that may change? Anything that he told Americans, this is what I'm going to deliver for you?
No, he seems to talk about the results he's aiming at more so than the methods for getting there. And of course, as we all know from everything, it's always the small print and the detail that matters. So it may work out well for people, may not work out well for people. We just don't know yet.
Yeah, we'll still be waiting to see if tax cuts are delivered, if his energy policy comes through in the way that he's telling Americans it will be. Well, after Trump spoke, we also know that freshman Senator Elissa Slotkin gave a speech. Here's what she had to tell Americans about Democrats' message following Trump's address.
We have to do a few basic things. We need to bring down the price of things we spend the most money on: groceries, housing, healthcare. We need to make more things in America with good-paying union jobs and bring our supply chains back home from places like China. We need to give American businesses the certainty they need to invest and create the jobs of the future. And we need a tax system that's fair for people who don't happen to make $1 billion.
So Dennis, was there anything that specifically stood out to you from the senator's speech?
Well, I think two things. First of all, I think what we're seeing is the beginning on the part of Democrats to redefine their party. We know, for example, that the Republican Party is no longer the party that Iowans knew as Bob Ray's Republican Party. It's a very different Republican Party now. Democrats have not figured out how to adapt to that and react to that. And what we see in Senator Slotkin is an attempt to try to begin, at least, to reformulate that. What was also interesting in part of her speech was in terms of the difference in the visions of the world, both of which have something to say for them. She presented the notion of the U.S. in terms of national security and foreign policy as part of an interconnected world. And what we got from President Trump repeatedly is the sense that America is all alone, we have to go it alone because we're being played for saps by our supposed allies. So these are two very different visions of the world. That's where the parties are at this point.
Well, Dennis, thanks for joining us, giving us your analysis on what we heard tonight. We'll send it back to you, Ben, in the studio.